This recording is going to hit the basics of fractions. Um, the first chapter or so has some fractions in there. All throughout solving, you'll have fractions. And then again in chapter 6, there's a lot of fractions. And those fractions are actually with expressions, and it's called rational expressions. And so it's pretty important that we understand the rules of fractions. So this recording is going to just give a overview of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing fractions. So that's kind of my plan for this recording. So if we have a fraction, 1/3 plus 2/3, we'll go something easy. If we have something like this, in order to add fractions, you have to have a common denominator. And the reason is, if you remember what a fraction is describing how many parts you have out of a total number of parts. So basically what 1/3 means is we took a whole, we divided it into 3 parts, and now we have one of those 3 parts. The other one means we have a whole, and we divide it into 3 parts, and we have 2 of those. So if I take 1/3 and I add 2 more thirds, I now have 3/3, or I have the whole thing. Okay? But what if I have 1/3 plus 5/6? What if I have something like that? My 1/3 and my 5/6 are different sizes, because the 1/3 says I took the whole and divided into 3 parts. The 5/6 says I took a whole and divided into 6 parts. So those parts are different sizes. So in order to add those together, I have to have the same number of parts. So my denominator has to be the same. I have to have what's called a common denominator. So the question I have to ask myself is, what does both the 3 and the 6 go into? Or if I look at my deal here, if I have something that has 3 pieces, how do I get that to match up with something that's divided into 6 pieces? And the way I do that is I double the number of pieces I have. I cut them in half again, so I have 6 pieces now. Now my 1/3 I have isn't 1/3 anymore. Now it's 2/6. I have 2 pieces out of 6. My 5/6, I still have 5 pieces out of 6. And so my total number of pieces I have when I add those together is 7/6. So I have one whole piece plus one more sixth. When you add fractions, you have to have a common denominator. When you subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. If I have 4/7 minus 1/3, common denominator, what does both the 7 and the 3 go into? Remember, it has to be at least as big as the biggest number. So it has to be at least a 7. So the number that they both go into is 21. 7 goes into 21, and 3 goes into 21. This one is kind of easy because it's just 7 times 3. So what did I multiply the 7 times to get the 21? Was a 3. If I multiply the bottom by 3, I have to multiply the top by 3. I multiplied the 3 by 7, so I have to multiply the top by 7. Subtract the top, leave the bottom alone. When you add and subtract fractions, you have to have a common denominator. What if my denominator is kind of messy, like 12 and 9? What is a common denominator between 12 and 9? Let's say I have 5/12 and 4/9. What is my common denominator between 12 and 9? If you know your times tables, you know that 12 goes into 36, and you know that 9 goes into 36. I don't have to go clear up to 9 times 12. I don't have to go to 98, or sorry, 108. Okay? I need to know my times table so my numbers stay small. I want to find the smallest or the least common multiple. Okay. What if I don't know that? What if I can't see that? One way is to break them into what's called a prime factorization. What does both the 12 and 9 break down into? The 12 breaks down into 4 and 3. The 4 breaks down into 2 and 2, and those are the 12's prime factors. 9 breaks down into 3 and 3. Your common denominator must contain all of the factors from each of the denominators. So it has to have a 2, it has to have another 2, and it has to have a 3 from the 12. From the 9 now, it has to have 2 3s. Well, it only has 1, so let's add another one. And there's my common denominator. 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12, times 3 is 36. I don't do that, but if you need to, if you cannot see the common denominator by just knowing your times tables, you can always break it into its prime factors. It takes a little more work, takes a little more time, but it always works. Okay. What if I multiply 12 times to get 36? 3. If I multiply the 12 times 3, I have to multiply the 5 times 3. Multiply the 9 times 4, so I multiply the 4 times 4. Add the top, leave the bottom alone. At this point in time, I always want to check and see if I can reduce that 31 over 36. And nothing goes into 31 and 36. So I'm done. Adding and subtracting fractions, you have to have a common denominator. Multiplying and dividing. When I multiply and divide fractions, I got to have a common denominator. Sorry, I do not have to have a common denominator. When I multiply, I can either multiply straight across and then simplify, or I can simplify diagonally and vertically and then multiply. Right now, if I multiply 24 times 60 and 34 times 50, that would be some very big numbers. I don't want to have to do that. So I'm going to reduce them and see if I can get them a little simpler before I multiply. So my first question I'm going to ask is there something that goes into either diagonally or vertically? And right away I notice the 60 and the 50. 60 and 50 are both divisible by 10. Goes into there 6 times, and 10 goes into there 5 times. Next question. Is there anything that goes into 5 and 24? And, or, is there anything that goes into 6 and 35? And unfortunately, there's nothing that goes into either one of those. Next question. What about the 24 and the 35? And there's nothing that goes into those. So I'm done. I just multiply straight across. 6 times 24, which is still a pretty big number. What is that? 144. And 5 times 35, which is 175. And again, I want to think, is there something that goes into 144 and 175? And there's not. So I'm done. Okay? Next thing. Dividing. Excuse me. When I divide, I cannot cross simplify until after I switch it to multiplication. Remember the rules for division. When you divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. So dividing by 12 over 20 is done by multiplying by 20 over 12. Okay? There's really no operation for division. The rule is you multiply by the reciprocal. Flip the term over. Now, multiply the same way we just got done doing. I would cross simplify or vertically simplify. What goes into 15 and 36? What goes into 15 and 36 is 3. 3 goes into 15 5 times. 3 goes into 36 12 times. What goes into 12 and 20? 12 and 20, 4 goes into there 3 times. 4 goes into there 5 times. We're done. Nothing else goes into those, and I get 25 over 36. When you divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, I think that's about it. I hope that helps. If you have more questions, make sure you holler.